Hey kids, howdy, and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It's the end of December. Can't believe it. So
Last week of the year, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year. Speaking of New Year, I am doing my Astro Overview for 2025. I do it live on New Year's Day. I've been doing that for a couple of years. It's like a tradition for me. If you, of course, can't join me or don't want to spend time with me on New Year's Day, you got other plans, you can use the recording. But please get your seat. Go on over to michaellennox.com. There's a big banner right in the middle of the site. Purchase your seat today. It's $26.99. There's lots and lots and lots of handouts. And I do it live on New Year's Day. And then, of course, you can use the recording of the handouts all year long to contextualize your experience using astrology, but I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be quite a year.
Oh, wait. So I just wanted to clarify, your handouts can be used and referenced every month
In fact,
throughout the year.
there's like 15 pages of handouts, and 12 pages of
Amazing.
that is something that I do every year that I use for myself as the outline for the webinar. I use it to manage my global healing meditations once a month. It's that outline that turns into the outline for this podcast.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do this year, just to be more supportive in a year that's going to be really challenging with epic and fast changes, I thought let's provide even more help. So the outline is way more comprehensive than ever because it includes the retrogrades, the planet sign changes. It's very comprehensive. And so, yes, I wanted to offer that to my peeps as a resource because it's going to be, it's going to be quite a year. So join me on January 1st if you can. If not, use the recording. We have a question from Dorian today that I thought was really an interesting question and would allow me to talk about two important and interesting things. So let's see what Dorian has to say.
Great.
I've studied the characteristics of each astrological sign through many different authors, which makes it super difficult to explain to interested folks. My question is, how do I explain to someone that just because your sun sign is so-and-so does not mean that's who you are completely? I've also recognized how, and this is very interesting, I also recognized how each degree of a sign is almost like a storyline, kind of like tarot, you know? Your thoughts are so important to me, so I love this. And she said, so have at it. I'm having at it, Dorian. I love this question. So let's start with the sun sign thing about astrology. So if you've been listening to me a while, you know I have a little bit of a pet peeve about this because there's such a focus on sun sign astrology out there in social media world, and it really is so paltry when compared to what astrology actually is. So I won't go into the whole story, though I've told it before. In the last century, by 1950, every newspaper in the world had a horoscope column. And the reason why it was a sun sign horoscope column is because it's the only thing in astrology that corresponds routinely to days and months of the year. In other words, the astrology columns could say, here's your birth date, you know, and here's the sign if your birth date is in this range. Now, I'm not denying the importance of sun sign. In some ways, it is the most important aspect of the natal chart because it represents your center. Just as the sun in the solar system is the burning constancy that, if you can imagine the warmth of the sun that radiates out in all directions, is aware of the planetary movement and integrates the changes that happen as the planets make shapes in the cosmos. So we do that as well. We, in our sun sign, contextualize the other aspects of what it is to be a human being. And because it's the center, yes, if you read the qualities of the archetype of the sign that your sun is in, you should identify with them because it's the sun. It's your identification sense. But oh my God, it can't tell you how you process your unconscious impulses. That's the moon. It can't tell you how you give and receive love. That's Venus. It can't tell you how you fight or fuck because that's Mars.
There's so much more.
Right, exactly. And it's like incompatibility. This is what makes me crazy. Well, dating, compatibility. I shouldn't date this sign or that sign. Well, that's nonsense. There's no such thing as sun sign incompatibility. It doesn't mean that you won't feel the differences of your sun sign within the coupling.
Okay.
But say two people meet and their sun signs square each other. If you went to some pop astrologer on the fucking internet, they'd be like, oh, you can't date a person with a square sun sign. It'll be terrible.
Yeah.
Except that it won't be if the moons make for good intimacy. The Venus makes for good giving and sharing of love. Mars creates chemistry, and all of the other planets as well interact and create the actual experience of the relationship. And then if the sun signs have some agitation, like opposites or squares, then that just sets up a yummy kind of friction that will only suck if the other planetary interactions suck. So from that regard, the answer to your question is, Dorian, or rather, the answer for you to use when questioned to other people is just say, yes, the sun sign is important because it's like the center of you, but moon rules your insides, Mars rules your body, Venus rules your love, and there's the other planet placements as well. So that's the simple answer to somebody who doesn't know much about astrology that will immediately get them to say, oh, right, that makes sense. There must be so much more than just the sun sign. But this other thing that you say is, it got me very excited because you're talking about the Sabian symbols. Each degree point does tell a story. And somewhere back in the 20s of last century, about 100 years ago, and I'm not prepared as I might have been if I had, prepared better. I could tell you like who did it. Some woman, a channeler, was taken through a process of focusing on each degree and coming up with a symbol. These symbols were published and they were ravenously grabbed up by astrologers. People over the last 100 years loved the Sabian symbols. Look this up if this interests you, Sabian. There is an image for each degree point. When I was first starting out in astrology, I used them a lot because it was just fun to get deeper and richer texture to what a placement might mean. I don't use them anymore as a function of my working with people, but I do have a pal, shout out to Joe if you're listening to this episode, who's in love with the Sabian symbols. And I always love when he will sometimes email me the Sabian symbol for a particular new moon or full moon, because they're beautiful archetypal messages, just like a tarot card.
Literal images.
Yes, like I like, woman in a boat.
Yeah.
Looking longingly, man with spear, knitter making socks, hawk fly. None of these are accurate. I'm just right. But they're beautiful, and they're another layer of sort of archetypal texture. So yeah, Dorian, look into the Sabian symbols. I think you'll enjoy them. And back to you. Have at it.
So are we done with this Mercury retrograde shenanigans? Whatever.
Not quite.
Like fully done or?
Not quite. In fact, if you remember, last week, Mercury had turned around when we did our episode because he turned around with the full moon that happened, I think, on Sunday of last week. And we got together for last week's podcast, and there was nothing to talk about outside of his turnaround. He was direct at long last, but he moved through last week without triggering one of the triple transits that he made. And this week, he triggers 3 of them. 2 of them are on Thursday, so that makes the end of the week a little bit interesting. And the other one happens on Sunday. So let's break them all down. One of the triple transits that actually has some yummy possibility that was built into this retrograde cycle was an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Oppositions are considered hard geometry because it's a tension. When 2 points oppose, something has to happen, and that something could just as easily be a crash as it could be a dance move, right? So we think of oppositions as a tension of opposites that will generate or create some transcendent third. So, depending on what planets are holding the opposition, that transcendent third can be what we might call good or bad. And with Jupiter, it's going to have to be good because there's no such thing as a, air quotes, bad Jupiter transit. Now, there can be excess in this. You could think more highly of your ideas than your ideas merit with Jupiter in an opposition to Mercury. So that might be something to consider. But it's also about expansion and hope and possibility, as long as you don't suffer the shadow of Jupiter, which is overvaluing something or the idea of extra and excess. They're actually operating with each other really powerfully, Mercury and Jupiter, because they're doing something we call mutual reception. That is, they're in each other's signs. Mercury is in Sagittarius. That's the Jupiter-ruled sign of expansion and abundance and learning and growing and healing and exploring and spiritual seeking and travel and education and other cultures. He's also not happy in the sign because it's too much stimulation for the poor planet of Mercury. But Jupiter's over there in Gemini, which is one of Mercury's signs. So that takes the idea of these two in an opposition, where we have to consider the potential artifact of shadow, of Jupiter's sense of excess, or overvaluing, and it ups it, right? It's just like two people talking to each other in the same language that the other speaks, right? Mother tongue moment. Now, I want you to put this on hold for a second as I talk about one of the other triple transits, because both of these are hitting on Thursday. This over-the-top excess one hit first on November 18th, and then again on December 1st. So that might be an important thing to understand what's going to happen at the end of this week, to look back at those dates. And if there was anything in your experience that seemed like it might be a cautionary moment of being too big for your britches or biting off more than you can chew or seeing something you want to create that is now losing its luster, that might be part of what this week brings. It's important to look back at those dates to see if there's a storyline unfolding. The second transit that hits on Thursday, though, is very much the opposite energy of anything Jupiterian. It's a square from Mercury to Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets. These are the boots on the ground planets, which means that if Mercury is touching them both, then Mercury, our perceptions, our voice, our communication in a bumpy backward journey, is bumping into things that are right there on the planet boots on the ground. With Jupiter, it's the things you want to expand and grow. And with Saturn, it's about the responsibilities needed and the hard work necessary in order to have those things that you desire. The story that Saturn and Jupiter tells is, if you are responsible, disciplined, focused, and know what foundations you want to create and are working to create them, Jupiter allows for the delightful, yummy expansion that's possible when you dance on top of a firm foundation below you. This is a real Mercury retrograde-y kind of transit because Mercury also rules our transportation, our technology, our movement through the world. And so this square has been a very Mercury retrograde-y, delay, breakdown, problematic energy that hit first on November 12th and December 6th. This is actually almost a more important dateline story to look back at, because this will reflect if there is a theme from November 12th and December 6th that you can readily see. Don't look too hard. It's very likely that it has to do with moments that were delayed or broken down or problematic. And it's interesting to me that these two return on the same day. So for one thing, it says that Thursday and a little bit Wednesday, a little bit Friday are going to have challenges and breakdowns between excess and overvaluing things and needing to focus on responsibility and, the have-tos and the get-tos. I'm reminded of my old boss at MGM, Robert Wittenberg. When I was director of sales for home video at MGM, he used to say to me, Michael, you're just too interested in the interesting and not focused enough on the important. And it was a valuable lesson because it was true. I wanted all of the interesting stuff, but I didn't necessarily want to do the hard work that merits it.
Yeah.
And so that's been a lifelong lesson for me. But certainly Thursday, that comes up in a way that might connect to the middle of November and the very beginning of December. We get a tiny little break because this third triple transit that hits this week is Sunday. But it's the agitated one. It's the Sesca square, agitated 135-degree geometry between Mercury and Mars. Now, this has been part of why the Mercury retrograde was difficult, is that the other personal planet of Mars was also moving into his backward journey. They were backward at the same time for a while. And even though Mercury's moving forward now, he's still holding a light trine with Mars retrograding in Leo. So we're out of the Mercury retrograde challenge, but we're not out of the pull or the drag on the system because Mars is still retrograde and will be for quite a while.
How long is the Mars retrograde lasting?
Well, you can think of it as all of December and all of January and most of February. I think, let me look this up real quick. Yeah, February 24th is when Mars turns around. And so there's a sense of delay and holdback, right, through the winter. And because he's still retrograde now, I think that makes Sunday's Sesca square all the more agitating. So if one thing to do with this, of course, is just know that as we move through the weekend with a focus on Sunday, as we're building towards the new moon that hits on Monday, we're experiencing some form of what will ultimately feel like Mercury retrograde dynamics, because even though Mercury is moving forward, Mars is not. There might be themes from November 18th and November 30th when this agitation first hit. So you can glance back to those dates, give or take a few days from each other. And if that's too much detail for you guys, you don't have to get like nitpicky specific down to the date. Just think mid-November and early December and now. And there's a connection between those three time frames. I will say that on Monday of next week, Mercury will trine Chiron, which is a nice sort of finishing touch of the retrograde cycle that's helpful for us to have been learning stuff about like how to work with these cycles and the underbelly and the mystery of life. That will be part of the new moon. But as we lean into that and, through the weekend, expect delays and agitations and look back to those earlier dates to see if there's some information that might contextualize this moment more effectively. There is a hard fucking transit that I just feel like I have not talked about enough. I'm thinking about it now because I'm thinking on my outline, it hits on Tuesday, and it also hit back in the third week of August. It's Jupiter squaring Saturn. This is significant. From the summer to the end of the year, we've been experiencing the problematic challenges of delays to our projects. Saturn delays sometimes. Jupiter's about what we want to create. Saturn is also going to be teaching us lessons about how we value things, right? Jupiter says, yes, look at that. Yes, look at that. And Saturn says, wait, that's not for you. Or, yes, you can have that if you come and spend some time here and do this work.
Mm.
We want what we want when we want it. And first we want it delivered. And that's sort of our Jupiter experience. And any bumps into those kinds of delays and breakdowns where the world doesn't feel like it's cooperating with your desires might be a reflection of this ongoing square.
Mm.
You know, and even though it hit a bunch of months ago and tomorrow, Tuesday, you know, every time the moon moved through the ecliptic, it was triggering this square. That's why I'm saying I'm surprised that I haven't mentioned this more in my daily astro alerts. I think because it hasn't been exact, I don't see them as exact. And so I have forgotten to readily remind my audience in September, October, and November that this square was being held all year long from like early summer on. And tomorrow's the last peak. That means we're about a month and a half away from it being fully in our rear view mirror.
Mm.
I've talked a lot about energy in the latter part of 2024 because I use astrology so much as a contextualizing tool for our inner process and self-investigation. We are moving into a really crazy year next year where change is going to start happening at breakneck speed. And if you think that's already so, because it sort of feels like that language could be thought of as true for now, I promise you it ain't nothing like next year and the year after. Changes are coming fast and furious, and we are all being prepared for that.
Hmm.
And this square has created a pace of both foundation and expansion that is the world on its own terms. And so that's how I'd like you to consider tomorrow's squares, to sort of just think about looking back on the last sort of 6 months of 2024 as we get ready to move into 25 as a new year, and just sort of ask yourself the question, are you prepared for lots of change and transformation? Are you so secure with who you are and what it is you're up to doing that you could pivot on a dime to move in reaction to and response to changes on the planet that are coming next year? And this transit has been instructive and helpful, even if it's been a little bothersome. And so another nod to Robert Wittenberg and his interesting and important. This is really the transit that asks us, if we want something expansive and beautiful, are we willing to do the work to create the foundation that will support it? If you focus too much on Saturn, you're going to self-deprecate yourself into like no movement at all. If you focus too much on Jupiter, then you're going to be focusing on the bright and shiny object and miss your footfall somehow and trip. The best use of this transit is to understand how foundation and expansion relate so that we can attend to both. Now, before we part today, I want to talk a little bit about the next new moon. Now, it's on Monday of next week, which means we're going to be talking about it in next week's episode, in which I'll talk about it in more depth. But because it's coming on the heels of the beginning of next week, I thought we'd just put a little nod to this is the intention-setting moment of the new year. No matter where the Capricorn new moon falls. I mean, this year it happens to fall on the 30th of December, so it's sort of part and parcel to right when the year ends on the calendar, 24 hours later. But, intention setting and, making resolutions are very different consciousness, Not because I think that there's some association with the word resolutions that implies, failure. But we as a culture have created an idea called New Year's resolutions, which in the zeitgeist really means the thing you desire that you don't do. Right?
Yeah, I don't use that word anymore personally.
Yeah, well, it's a shitty word because
I just
it's
say
like
goals.
Goals is great, but again, it's not the word that is the problem. It's that word and failure are synonymous culturally. Even if you would think, well,
Yeah,
that's not true.
that's
These
true.
are the resolutions, except that how do people talk about resolutions? They mostly talk about them from the failure of achieving them as opposed to the celebration of creating them.
True. Yeah.
When you set an intention dialed into the power of the new moon, now you're not in, might this fail because I'm not really grounding into what's the responsibility associated with this desire, right? We in Capricorn, the sign that Saturn rules, that says don't set the intention if you either don't have the discipline and the focus to create this or don't desire to create it and are willing to do any learning, lessons, training, work to create your desires. So, December 30th, 2:27 p.m. is the exact moment if you want to ritualize it. There's there's a lovely sextile from the new moon to Saturn. So Saturn rules this new moon, but he's also participating in it. That puts more power into the intention setting ability. And Mercury and Mars in the nodes, lots and lots and lots of stuff that we will talk about in next week's podcast in anticipation of that new moon that hits on Monday. Meanwhile, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email in Dreamer. Patricia is actually emailing in from Scotland.
Ooh, love that. Hey, Scotland.
Yeah, and so she says, "Dear Michael and Zoe, I love listening to your weekly podcast. I had a recent dream that I could use some help with. I dreamt I was at the veterinarian's and that I was the owner of two little dogs, a plump and thriving West Highland Terrier who's white, and a tiny, terrified, malnourished Scotty dog, Black. FYI, there's a brand of whiskey that's called Black and White, and these two dogs are the logo for it. This is something I was fascinated by as a little girl." So I guess these images have come from somewhere, you know?
Yep. Totally. No, I love that. I love that.
A middle-aged female veterinary nurse dressed in blue scrubs was telling me sternly that I had neglected the little black dog and that as a result, it was sick and causing contamination, and that I had no choice but to burn everything. I assumed she meant my clothes, furnishings, and household possessions. I felt shocked and guilt-ridden and exposed in my neglect. And I also felt extreme concern for the little black dog. But the nurse implied that he was too far gone to be rescued and would have to be euthanized. This dream was so vivid and felt pretentious. I would be very grateful for any light you could shed on it. In gratitude, Patricia.
I want to start by saying that one of the last things that Patricia said interested me a lot when she said that she felt like the dream might be portentous, that it was portending something to come, like a precognitive dream. And so I want to respect that feeling and sensation without validating that there is something to be worried about or concerned about. Because I don't think the concern in the dream has to do with some sort of futurizing problem because of backward neglect of something. I think the dream is about a kind of personal neglect, but it doesn't land on me like Patricia's in any trouble. But there is something to be aware of, and it starts with always, what's the first scene? Where are we and why are we there? So if we're at the vet, we're absolutely in some consideration that something's wrong. You don't go to any kind of a doctor unless there's a problem, and the vet is the challenge, the place you go when the challenge is with a beloved pet. So then, because it's a dream, we have to look at pets as a symbol of how we give and receive unconditional love. That's why we created dogs and cats in the consciousness of the human race, so that we could have an outward projection of inward love. I mean, I know most of my following knows that I'm, fallen madly in love with my puppy Penelope. And I had a puppy when I was 24, and I loved Max, but I didn't have the empathy and the openness to love as fully as I do now. And now that I have a doggie that I love, and I've been talking about dogs and cats as symbols of unconditional love in dreams for decades, it's like, yep. So Patricia at the vet is in consideration of something that needs some attention, but it ain't major. She's not at a doctor. She's not in a hospital. It's not about her per se, even though it's not about the dogs either. But you see what I'm saying, Zoe? Like if this were a dream about Patricia being in a big problem, she wouldn't be at a vet. She'd be in the surgeon's office or the doctor's office. So I'm gonna diminish how I perceive the danger in this dream because it's the vet. And I'm going to say it's specifically about this idea of loving. I'll say unconditional love. And we all know there's no fucking such thing as unconditional love. All love is conditional because we are human beings. And the love that is unconditional is the energy of the divine that we do our best to connect to during our lives. But make no mistake about it, none of us are loving unconditionally. And we're not even here to love unconditionally. We're here to bump into it in big, bad ways and learn and grow. And we sometimes call that shadow work. Bumping into the places where love is not and turning within to do whatever work is needed on the inside would be shadow work. And here we've got these perfectly expressed binary of black, white, yin, yang, feminine, masculine. So if the black dog is the dog that's being ignored, then it's a shadow work that's being ignored. And if there's a chastisement coming from the nurse, right? The nurse is someone of authority who knows what is best and right for good health. So that's a part of Patricia. There's a part of Patricia that knows better, that sort of self-scolding. But if we're going to take a look at what's being scolded or why, it's absolutely about ignoring things that we would call shadow or darker. Hence, the white dog, the love and light dog, is plump and thriving, but the shadow dog is not. And we want to make sure that we are not only as connected to our shadow as we are to our light, we want to love our shadow as much as we do our lightness. Not from an indulgent place, but from an explored place. That we've looked at all our shadowy places and said, this too I can love. Now, I want to say this too. The fact that there's a very direct personal correlation to alcohol, then escapism has to play a part. It doesn't have to be literally alcoholism. It's not, I'm not saying, hey, Patricia, stop drinking.
Yeah, because it's like a vision from her childhood, an image from her childhood.
Right. One that captivated her, one that happens to connect to alcohol. So we can't ignore that.
Mhm.
So rather than being literal about it, that this is about, Patricia's life isn't working because she's drinking too much. And if that's true, Patricia, stop. Stop drinking. Back away from the drink. No, I just think it's important to make a connection between something about the shadow is being ignored, and it's being ignored in the spirit of escapism. I don't want to look at that. I
Okay.
don't want to get messy. I don't want to, right? That's what I'm kind of saying. This section in the dream where the prescription is burn everything. And in fact, the nurse says everything's too far gone and must be death rebirthed. To me, we're always looking for the purity of what the dream message is,
Mhm.
while removing overly human projections. Like in the world of spirit and our multidimensional identity, there is no judgment about how well or not we are doing our shadow work. Our higher self doesn't give a shit, right?
Mhm.
It'll guide us and keep us, in our bodies and moving along the path. So when I hear that the nurse is like, no, you got to burn it all down to the ground, that sounds to me like a guilt thought, a fear thought, a negating thought, rather than an absolute direction, right? I
Mhm.
like to say, I say this all the time, dreams are for us, never against us. So the life is against us, right? If we were at the vet and some nurse was, being belligerent because she had an opinion, that would absolutely be a kind of moment to object and to push back. And, I can only imagine if that happened to me in a office cubicle in the vet. If, I was there with Empress Penelope, that wouldn't go over too well. But that's waking life.
Yeah.
It's a dream. So we have to make sure that we're holding all of the images in the dream to represent Patricia's unfolding and expansion, not her limitation. Even if the dream is showing a limitation. So what I think the limitation that the dream is showing is just, here's the resistance. That there's shadow work that needs to be done always. It's always scary to do. Patricia's having a dream that tells her that something needs attention that she's rather escaping from instead of diving into. It's shadowy in nature, and she feels guilt about that. But the guilt is just the human resistance that actually gets in the way of being able to comfortably look at a part of ourselves that we are not happy about, embrace it and give it a little love and integrate it more by virtue of having looked at an unexplored fear or shadowy thought form. So, Patricia, look back to the time frame when you had the dream and explore things that might have come up in like the week or so before that might have included something that bothered you, scared you, or somehow or other tripped you up a little bit, where then the dream world took you to that place of resistance so that perhaps you could wake up a little more ready to explore something that was a bump back when you had this dream that might be a helpful way to understand why it came.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.